Hello, good morning. Wow, we have an echoing chamber today. How is everyone doing on this bright, sunny, very warm day? Want to get things off rolling to a banging start with our very first speaker. Stefanie Haustein is an assistant professor at the University of Ottawa School of Information Studies. She teaches research methods and evaluation, social network analysis, and knowledge organization. Her current research focuses on scholarly communications, very relevant to us, bibliometrics, also relevant to us, altmetrics, and open science, analyzing the role of social media in academia. Another fun fact is she is working with a colleague, Juan Pablo Alperin, at Simon Fraser University, co-directing the ScholComms Lab, a research group that analyzes all aspects of scholarly communications in the digital age. I think it's probably fair and square to say that we are in it right now. One also important information that Stefanie is a late bloomer, I would say. She came to Metadata quite late. Only 10 years ago, her first metadata moment was as a PhD student downloading Web of Science citation records 500 at a time. That's pretty arduous, but I'm sure she will tell us more about that. Here's Stefanie.
Thanks, everyone. Good morning. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I came up with this topic, good metadata plus metrics literacy equals better academia. What do I actually mean with that? I'll tell you in a bit. I just wanted to give you some faces to, oh, I pushed the wrong button, right? See, yeah, they told me 3 times and I still pushed the wrong button. I'm taking this one now. So I wanted to just give you some faces to the team that Jen was talking about. So Juan Pablo Alperin, that some of you may know or many of you may know, and I are working together, and we formed a ScholComm Lab last year, and we have a fabulous team working on all aspects of scholarly communication in the digital age. So now to the topic or the title of my talk today, good metadata plus metrics literacy equals better academia. I definitely came up with the title on a very optimistic day. I think I just came back from OpenCon 2 weeks ago. On a more pessimistic day, I could have also called it metadata plus metrics literacy equals academia today. So what do I actually mean with that? Well, you all know what that means, you know, like something like applying the impact factor on the individual article level to use that for academic tenure review and promotion processes. Well, I couldn't put it in a better way, but thank God to emojis, you know, it's still cute. So I was actually thinking about what I could talk to you today, and there are so many different aspects of how metadata affect metrics. And I thought, well, I'm gonna, you know, contribute to the whole impact factor bashing game, so I'm trying to not make it the same. I just wanted to see a show of hands. Who here has never been to a talk where the impact factor was bashed? Yeah, I thought so. So I could talk to you about all the flaws, like having a 2-year citation window, being a synchronous indicator that basically covers citations received in 1 year to publications in the 2 previous years. I could talk to you about the problem of using a mean for a skewed distribution, that it's not representative to the majority of papers. I could and actually will talk to you about the numerator-denominator asymmetry, so more of that in a bit. I could also talk to you about the disciplinary differences and the problem for example, social science and humanities. We know all of that problem. The Web of Science coverage, the differences between different fields, and the impact factor is not normalizing for that, so we're basically comparing apples and oranges. But I actually, after talking to many of you yesterday, and then also particularly talking to Jeff Builder and hearing all your talks, I thought I'm going to give the talk a different spin. For all of you that want an update on the, you know, what's wrong with the impact factor in academia today, I recommend this update. So there are numerous hundreds, maybe even thousands of papers published on this, but this one is not even really published. It's a book chapter by Vincent Larivière and Cassidy Sugimoto that basically give a new or up-to-date recap. In the same paper, they also show what I want to focus on today, namely citation matching, and that was actually a topic that Jeff brought me on yesterday, so I actually want to go into the fine print. So instead of giving you a lot of numbers, I want to actually travel back in time and see how all these decisions based on these indicators were made and what brought us to this day having such problems with one indicator. So also what I usually never do is cite my own work, and since I'm actually not really, giving you the reference, it's not a self-citation, I think. This is from my thesis in 2012. I just want to show you how naive I was at that time. So I was talking about how the impact factor was constructed and all the problems of, in the 1960s and 1970s computational problems. And in 2012, finishing my PhD, I said, while today these problems can be solved by advanced algorithms, these possibilities were not available in the 1970s. And now I'm really coming to the point of where I thought, well, these problems are solved, aren't they? But then Jeff told me yesterday about a blog article that I hadn't yet read, because is it from last week or yesterday? But it really highlights that we are still fighting those problems and they're not really visible. We're always talking about the indicator that comes out in the end. We're creating rankings based on that, but we're usually not looking at fine print. The great thing of being in academia today, 2018, the digital age, we do see a lot of fine print, and we're making things more open and visible because we have blog posts that might explain what happened behind the scenes. And this blog post here on the Crossref Labs blog by Dominika, probably going to pronounce that the wrong way, Kacik. So a great post explaining, how references are actually matched today. So what Crossref is actually doing in 2018. And I think I'm not going to go into detail because Jeff will probably speak to this afternoon. What shocked me in the fine print is that basically right now, through parsing the references, the precision is great, right? Like whatever we match, it's probably right, but the recall is only 42%. And I know this is Crossref Labs, and Jeff will talk to you. It's probably higher, and there are quite some issues with what DOIs were in there. But I just wanted to show you and highlight here that there's some fine print too, and it says the weak spot of parsing-based approaches is degraded and noisy reference strings, which do not appear to use any of the known citation styles. And then there's also a weak spot of this new approach, of the search-based approach, is short reference strings, and in particular citation styles that do not include the title in the reference string. So we always get some fine print of what works and what doesn't work, and even if things work well for 95%, there are always problems with the rest. So I'm traveling in time now, back to 2002. I also recommend looking at this again because Crossref was actually mentioned as the pretenders to the throne in this Nature article, so it's always nice to, go back 16 years. So I want to read to you what they said in this Counting House article, how the Web of Science at that time was doing the reference matching. So they describe, to store a research paper in its database, ISI employees highlight the following fields: author, address, journal title, volume, year, and page number. Next, the computer takes a few bytes of information from each highlighted field to build up an identifying code or tag that is unique to that paper. A similar data capture and tagging process occurs for the references at the end of the paper. Algorithms then compare the citation tags with an article tags already in the database, and each successful match counts as a citation. So what was done with OCR then, is done a bit more advanced digitally, but it's not so far away. So that was 2002. Now I want to go into the fine print of 1972. So this is like Garfields really a well-known science article, citation analysis as a tool in journal evaluation that has always been cited of like, yeah, how did we get here? But it's actually interesting to go into the footnotes and reread those. And when talking about how they construct the impact factor and this asymmetry between counting all citations in the numerator but only certain documents and in the denominator, you actually, it's more interesting to read the footnotes than the full text. So here he says, I have not attempted in this article to limit the definition of items published to lead articles, original communications, or the like. Even assuming if it were possible to construct an acceptable classification that would accommodate all of the different kinds of published material, it would have been impossible for me, within the resources available for this article, to have examined individually each of the approximately 600,000 items that I use for the items published base. So I actually had to go back and wasn't even sure anymore, but so the ISI switched later on, after this 1972 piece, to only count certain article types. So what we know today, that it's articles, reviews, and letters, and not counting editorial material, for example. So if you go further back, you actually, and I didn't have the book anymore, but I did still cite it in my thesis. So you get back to this paper, Martin and Gilchrist, 1968, that was published before Garfield did this, and he probably, because he also cites it in the 1972 paper, he probably changed his mind on like reducing it to only certain document types that are citable items from this document. And what I thought was really interesting is highlighted here how they kind of describe what they did and why they did it. So they say what constitutes a citable item is a nice point, and we proceeded on an ad hoc basis, arguing that we were more interested for correction purposes in preserving the ratios between journal sizes than in achieving a pure and absolute accuracy based on a set of complex but ultimately subjective rules. We counted what we loosely called papers, communications, and letters. Records of the counts of these three sorts of items were summed to provide the number of citable items per journal for applying corrections to our figures of numbers of items cited. So I don't want to call out Martin and Gilchrist. I have written papers where I said, in a nice way, we proceeded on an ad hoc basis, and we weren't interested in that. We're doing that, and we have all the limitations, But in the end, you have an indicator. Nobody ever looks at the fine print again. So where we end up after that is basically here. So you all know these headlines, you all know what's wrong with academia today and things being ranked on impact factor, H-index, or journal rankings. A lot of these decisions are made ad hoc and based on data problems, and all these things by Garfield and Martin and Gilchrist, they were all decided based on what the data showed them at the time and what kind of made sense at the time and was a sensible decision based on computing power. I kind of just want to raise the issue that all those decisions we make based on, small things in the metadata basically may end up changing how we evaluate science, but also how we communicate. So we know now that because of those decisions, ad hoc decisions in the 1960s, 90s, and 70s, that we have journal editors kind of manipulating impact factors by publishing a lot of editorials and citing their own papers of the last 2 years so that they can kind of boost or engineer the impact factor. So now I actually come to the other topic I wanted to talk about. So not only what good and bad metadata do, but I think even if we have great metadata so we can construct sensible indicators, that doesn't mean that this is all. So I think we still need metrics literacy, and this is something that I'm currently developing based on my experience in the last 10 years in bibliometrics. What I've always seen is that within the metric community and people making indicators, there's quite a lot of, like different indicators that are there, and nobody is ever saying use one number. You can field normalize, you can find better citation windows than the impact factor uses, you can use percentile ranks instead of averages, but then what ends up being used by in academia, or the general academic population, is unfortunately always the impact factor and the H-index. And I think that's actually a problem that the bibliometric community has had over the last, 50 years or so, is that the communication isn't working well. Luckily, we now have some people from within the community that are trying to improve metrics literacy, so to basically explain what indicators measure and what they do not measure. For example, the Leiden Manifesto is one point. The metrics toolkit is really great. You should check it out. It's a website. It's run by librarians and with metrics experts, explaining what indicators mean. So these are the first steps into, explaining and proving this literacy of how you use or should not use indicators. But what I want to do is actually improve that and take it a step further, because all these things, the Leiden Manifesto, the recent book by Cassidy and Vincent, they're all still text. And I think every scholar always complains that they have too much to read. And that was one of the reasons why Garfield actually invented the ISI citation index. And I think we can do much better than using text to explain this. So we could, use more engaging methods from like active learning, teaching people, doing little quizzes. I actually just came back from ACIST and randomly met a PhD student that won the scientificity contest of the European chapter there, and she turned her thesis on book metadata into a board game, and I played that board game, and it was fun, but I also learned a lot about book metrics. Metrics and metadata. You also have podcasts. I don't know if many of you do, but I listen to podcasts all the time on so many different topics. Actually, I'm using it in the classroom as well, and I'm listening to a lot of podcasts on libraries, because I'm now teaching library students, but I've never worked in a library. So there are podcasts like Library Bite Guys or Lost in the Stacks that, I'll do it while doing the dishes, and I learn a lot. And I just want to mention the Secret Feminist Agenda podcast here, because they're actually trying out peer review. So together with Wilfrid Laurier Press, they're actually evaluating if the podcast could be a form of scholarly communication, but just using different means. And I also, what I'm going to focus on next is actually audiovisual material is the most effective and efficient in communicating certain topics. And I also, if you're interested in library and information science, I really want you to check out Stacks and Facts. So Peter Messer is a master's, he's just graduating from library and information science at UBC, and he's explaining really complicated topics in a really fun way. And I've talked to him, and you can really tell watching the videos, but he spends about 60 hours for creating a 20-minute video. And so you have the idea of, how much information is in there. And it's also a lot of fun to watch these. So I don't think that everything has to be always, even if the content is very serious, I still think we can use a more fun and effective and efficient way to communicate that. So that's just my pitch on that metrics literacy is important, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Stefanie. So I'll be moderating for the next couple of sessions. And just a reminder, for all questions, please give your name as well as your affiliation when you ask a question. So any first questions to open up the room? I have one. Since we do have quite a lot of publishers in the room, what would be your recommendations for what they can do to further the literacy efforts that you think are so badly needed amongst the researchers themselves?
That's a really great question. Almost sounds like we practiced this before. We didn't. But I think things are going in the right direction. So more transparency, I would say. So, for example, I do want to say that the Web of Science, I think last year or so, like revamped the way they present the impact factor, for example, and you now see the distribution. So they're still using the ranking, which I think is not great, but at least you can now see that, you know, the majority of papers, even if the impact factor is 15, the majority of papers don't ever get cited, and only you have this typical skewed distribution of the 80-20, the power law, so you see what's behind it. So for any kind of publishers using metrics, and I know you use them also, I've seen this a lot with the altmetric donut, for example. Yeah, it looks nice, and I think it's great that it does already, with the colors, try to communicate more information than just a number. But I know that you all use that as a marketing instrument, right? So it's like, oh, we got to get that because readers want that. I don't know if readers want that. Yeah, readers want shiny, pretty things, maybe. But I think it's also part of the community, or the responsibility of the community, to not reduce it to a number, and, you know, like just connecting things to the underlying data and being able to click through, even if you use a number, what's behind the number, and make it more transparent. I think that's also, part of the responsibility I see myself in, because I'm part of the bibliometric community using and producing those indicators. But I think also publishers that display them and use them for marketing purposes are also a bit in the responsibility to not only put things in the fine print, but make it more visible what these indicators are based on.
Thank you, Stefanie. Any other questions? Yes, right here, please. Hold on one second. The microphone's coming.
Rajiv from York University. We've been talking a lot about impact factors for quite some time. When I'm working with my faculty members in Faculty of Health and Sciences, it is always the point that comes up is the funding agencies are asking for this impact factor, or I'm applying for a grant and I'm showing my altmetric number and everything. So that change, I think, is not happening also because the people who can make the change cannot make it because of some other reasons.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point, and I started my PhD 10 years ago on the impact factor and why it's not a good indicator, and I remember reading things from the 80s or the 70s that already said you shouldn't do this, and I was like, why are we still doing it, right? And so why are we still discussing this? I think because, like, change in academia takes a very long time, and yes, it can be very frustrating to kind of have to bring this up again. And yes, I also brought up the impact factor today. I could have brought up so many other things. And I've been in the same situation, being called up by scientists telling me, I need my impact factor, you know, like the aggregated on, for each of the publications. And then I would say it doesn't really make sense. And then some of them, you know, could be convinced, and others even knew, and they said, yeah, but I want to get this, you know, funding, I want to get tenure and promotion, and people use this. Well, if you keep using it, then, you know, if you're in the same situation later, being on the review tenure and promotion committee, or being maybe even a funder, then nothing will ever change. So I know that it's really hard, and I'm also in the tenure track position and kind of in the game, but keep trying to not do it and do it differently. And I think that academia can change in that direction. That's my optimistic part, where I come up with the...
Any other questions? So I think, you know, as an educator by heart, some part of you must be optimistic. And I would love to know, what future are you training your students for, specifically within this context? Because they will be, and you are, part of that progress towards the instantiation, the realization of this future.
And that's definitely something. So I'm still a new professor. I'm teaching 2 classes now, and I'm teaching the future librarians. And I'm realizing now that, I am in a position that I can probably shape a little bit of the future information professionals. When I tell this story about, like, what actually happens or happened with this, you know, what's wrong with academia, the oligopoly that we have, and the profit that's being made on the back of scholars, the whole impact factor game, they can't believe it. But I think that if we tell the story and involve students early on, and you know, these are the next generation of people making those decisions, if we just, you know, tell them what the problem is and educate them, that's my optimistic point of view, then hopefully things will change. And like, not only for me being in the classroom and there being 20 students, like, I think as a community, as a bibliometric community or the scholarly community, I think we can still do this even with people that have been using the impact factor for 20 or 30 years. So I am still optimistic, and I haven't given up hope, and I think we just have to find a way that to make academia listen, and I think we cannot continue the way we have and expect somebody in cancer research to also, on top of staying on top of reading everything in cancer research, also read about bibliometrics. But I think they could, you know, listen to a podcast or watch a 5-minute video to get this information in a condensed way. And I think that's a community effort to spread the knowledge, and because I think mostly it's done because people just don't know better.
All right, I think that's all the time we have for questions. Thank you so much. Another round of applause for Stefanie.